If there's legislation that needs to be supported or bad legislation, we'll put that out there so that you can see and then compare, okay, did my representative vote yes on this or vote no on this? But it's tricky. It's really easy for them to hide in that. They'll all sit there and wait until a couple words get changed before they'll decide to go ahead and vote on it. So it's tricky. It's an uphill battle that we'll always be facing. But when there's something that's front and center legislatively, if you're on our Facebook or Instagram or email list or can go to captainsforcleanwater.org, we'll make sure that you know about it there.
Yeah, just to add to that, probably since we've been here this evening, I bet we've had half a dozen people just come up to myself saying, what can I do? What can we do? The biggest thing you can do is stay engaged and stay informed. Sign up for our newsletter, become a member so that when a time's crucial, we just had this infrastructure project. We got it put into the Water Resources Development Act. We were able to get that pushed through Washington, D.C. and the president to sign off on it. Those things happened because we were able to facilitate massive amounts of people contacting their representative. We had over 30,000 people from all 50 states send emails in a very short period of time to their senators and their congressmen demanding that this happen, and it worked. So the best thing you can do is to stay engaged. We have a very easy tool that we put on our website that when something's critical, we'll let you know through our lines of communication, and you can go on there. Everybody has a busy life. They have other things going on. We make it very simple and very fast. It takes you less than a minute, and you can go on and contact your representative. Tommy?
Yeah, and then anytime you go on that, make sure you share it with a friend. Any information you find.
That's a great point.
You've got to do it.
Anytime there's a call to action that you feel compelled that you need to be part of, try to make as many other people that you come in contact with. And that is, we are a grassroots organization. We're just a voice of the people, and the way that works is truly just a domino and pyramid effect of everybody sharing with their people. So we do have one short video to kind of wrap it up.
The Everglades is the last frontier that we have in Florida. It's a beautiful place that is just being strangled by the neck.
In Florida, we have a state of emergency at several beaches.
The severe algae bloom on the St. Lucie River, responsible for shutting down several beaches in South Florida, prompted a state of emergency.
Beaches empty.
The slime and giant plumes of algae you see are symptoms of a man-made creation inflicted on Florida's ecosystem.
The people of Florida have known about these problems for a long time, but until now, everybody's been fragmented, and there was no group to bring them together to really unify their message and make their voices heard.
In the past, there's really never been an organization like Captains for Clean Water that has rallied the troops, both the fishing communities and the tourism industry, to make a difference on these water quality issues.
Bringing people together and educating them on the solutions that will have the greatest impact is one of the main roles that we have here at Captains for Clean Water.
It was very organic beginnings that has made Captains for Clean Water a huge success. Both Daniel and Chris started this organization. They've reached out to tourism industry leaders and got them involved as well. So these guys have really stepped outside what their day-to-day lives are to make a difference for all of us.
It takes the voice of the people to make it to the policymakers and affect change. The challenge a lot of times with having everyone's voice be heard is that they can't always be where they need to be. They can't necessarily travel to Tallahassee and meet with their legislators when the time is crucial. They can't attend the South Florida Water Management District meetings. And we understand that. We are the voice of the people, and we're relaying their message.
We are able to change policy. We are able to see things through.
The Florida Senate passed its revised Lake Okeechobee water bill, and now lawmakers in the South Florida Water Management District have to devise a plan to create reservoirs for excess lake water.
We were unhappy with what was happening with the water quality in the state of Florida, and it was creating such disdain that politicians started to worry about their constituents supporting them, and Senate Bill 10 passed just because of that.
Yeah, we have had a very successful year, and that's 100% because of our supporters. Our supporters have enabled us to educate our community and bring their message to our policymakers. We've attended numerous planning meetings with the South Florida Water Management District. We've traveled throughout the state, met with thousands of residents, business owners, students, concerned citizens, and elected officials. We've been able to keep them informed of the progress and the implementation of Everglades restoration.
If there's one thing I could leave you with, is the inspiration that Captains for Clean Water has really provided. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're from conservative views, or if you're from progressive views. It has moved people to think about what the real problem is, what the root of it is, and how we have to change it. If there was ever a time for any of you guys to get on board with us, now is the time.
So the land slated where that reservoir is going to be built is state-owned land.
And it has been state-owned land since the late 90s.
Yeah, we've had it. So that land is leased back to Florida Crystals to grow sugarcane on. Oh. That lease is slated to expire, was slated to expire March of this year. So we were in a position where the lease was going to expire and we could start work on this reservoir. The current board of directors for the South Florida Water Management District, who are the people tasked with managing those leases and ultimately designing and initiating the project, in November's board meeting, decided with 12 hours to go at 9:30 at night to add to the agenda for that next day's meeting whether or not they should renew that lease for another 8 years. They did it at 9:30 at night the night before. Daniel and I found out about it. He literally called me. We were asleep. He called me and said, hey, this just came on the radar. We got in the trucks the next day, drove over, started driving over to their headquarters, and realized they had moved the board meeting from their headquarters in West Palm Beach to the University of Miami. So we hung a right and headed south and made it there. Not only did we show up and voice our concerns, let them know that this land's needed for this reservoir, that the people have not had the opportunity to review the terms of the lease and how that will affect the construction of the reservoir, but also Congressman Brian Mast, United States Congressman from the East Coast, drove down to a state agency where he doesn't have a federal responsibility. He drove down requesting that they delay a vote on whether or not to renew this lease just until December's meeting. Give us a chance to renew the terms.
On behalf of the
and
governor.
He drove there on behalf of Governor-elect Ron DeSantis. DeSantis called Brian Mast and said, I need you to go there and tell them not to approve this vote, not to vote on this, postpone the vote. The board sat there and listened to our testimony, listened to scientists, listened to, essentially the voice of the next governor of Florida, and then they unanimously voted to renew the lease anyway. And that type of action is exactly why we have publicly called for the resignation of every single person on that board.
Sure, so if you were to rewind the clock in Florida 150 years, the water that now falls down onto Lake Okeechobee and the Kissimmee River Basin, all that water used to flow south. It used to flow south through the Everglades and into Florida Bay, and it balanced the salinity of Florida Bay. Now, Florida Bay doesn't get enough fresh water, and the east and the west coast get way too much fresh water, and the Everglades cleans that water, so that doesn't happen anymore. That's why we get these polluted discharges from Lake Okeechobee. Florida Bay, the salinity got so high because it's not getting fresh water coming down, that water was evaporating. Florida Bay is like a big ice cube tray. It's a big, massive area, very shallow, pocketed water. The water starts to evaporate, salt concentrations go way up. They had 50,000 acres of grass in 2015 that died because the salinity was too high for anything to live in it. And what that caused now is all those nutrients. The seagrass down there is 18 inches, 2 feet high. Now all that's rotting, and it's just kind of stuck in there, and they're getting these bad cycles of algae blooms. You can see it in downtown Islamorada when the conditions are right. These algae blooms are flushing out all the bridges. The water's nasty colored coming out of Florida Bay. So the solution to this problem is getting that fresh water back into the Everglades. It's creating infrastructure, reservoirs, filter marshes, and flowways, so you can take Lake Okeechobee's polluted water, store it, clean it, and send it down to where Florida Bay gets all that water. And in doing so, you significantly reduce the discharges that are going to the estuaries. The Everglades used to be the filter. They were the filter that made this whole system work, and now that filter is removed. So that's why we're having these problems. And it's not a West Coast problem, it's not an East Coast problem, it's not a Keys problem, it's all one problem. The same problems that we're facing here, you fix those, you fix the problems in the Keys, and you fix the problems over in St. Lucie.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that this is one system that was broken and changed, nearly a century ago. And we can't look at Band-Aid solutions that just help, our river here, or just help our bay here, just help Okeechobee. We have to keep in mind the projects and the solutions that help the whole system. It's one giant system. The Everglades ecosystem goes from south of Orlando all the way to the Keys. And it's important for us to return that, remove the barriers to flow, get that water going back to the Everglades where it's needed. Yeah, Tommy.
That's the core too, what he's talking about. This is the core. We need to get these things done. Then we can step to the other things about the intercoastal waterways and different things.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of problems.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems, but I mean, all this red tide we experienced here this year, it's like if you had a small natural forest fire from a lightning strike, right? It would actually, it would burn away and it would burn itself out. But if we were by man letting, massive tankers of gasoline flow into the forest and that forest fire hits this added fuel, it just blows into this epic proportions. And that's what's happening. We're putting way too much nutrients, way too much fuel for these things into our water, so that when something like that happens, now they're lasting a year and their toxicity levels are much higher than they should be. So the biggest thing we can do is restore the Everglades, restore that system to operate the way it naturally did. And by doing so, we're going to eliminate a big part of the nutrients that are coming into our waters here locally that are exacerbating the problems that we've experienced this past year. One, I would encourage you, if you haven't, to read a couple books, A Land Remembered and The Swamp. The Swamp isn't as interesting of a read, but it really talks about the political side and what changes were made to the Everglades over the last 100 years. That'll help explain and give you a pretty good understanding, as well as information on our website about the conveyance issue. So we have two issues that we're dealing with here. One is pollution or nutrient loading, and the other is water conveyance, the timing and delivery of the water to the areas. They're two separate problems, and not one is, they have to both be addressed. So the nutrient load into our water must be addressed, but we could address just the nutrient load and have pure, clean, fresh water. And if we left the conveyance infrastructure the way it is, the Everglades would still die of lack of fresh water, and our estuary would still die because it gets too much fresh water. So we have to address infrastructure, conveyance, and we have to address nutrient loading and operations. And they go hand in hand. The Everglades restoration is over 68 projects. It's the largest natural restoration project ever undertaken in the world. This is no small feat. This is something that took decades and decades of manipulation to get us in the situation we're in now, and it's a big feat to get back. But we can get it back. There's overwhelming science. Over 207 scientists have said this is the problem. This is what needs to happen. So there's irrefutable evidence that this manipulation is why we're seeing these issues. Red tide is natural. So the way we get the water into the Everglades is through Everglades restoration. There's a couple plans. It's called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which is known as CERP, and then the Central Everglades Restoration Plan, known as CEP. And what that does is there's components to those plans. 68 projects. Some of those projects will clean the water. Some of the projects will control the timing and delivery of the water. Other projects remove barriers, canals and dams and weirs that are between Okeechobee and the Everglades. If anybody has traveled over to the Keys or to Miami recently, or you're going to, go down US 41 and you'll see there's now miles of bridges because the road, US 41, that was built, 100 years ago basically, was acting as a dam. And now there's bridges that have been constructed that are allowing that water to flow. But between US 41 and the bottom of Lake Okeechobee, there's still lots of different barriers through the central Everglades, the water conservation areas, and it's just been compartmentalized. So Everglades restoration is intended to remove those barriers, reconnect that system so that the water can flow south, and then other projects are intended to clean them.
Yeah, so the Everglades used to have three functions that it served to the estuaries. The first was storage. It was like a big sponge. When it rained, it sucked all the water up. It was a huge area. So there was, water was never very deep, just a foot or so deep, but spread over such a massive area, it had a huge storage component. Second was treatment. It cleaned the water as it flowed down. It let the sediments settle, and the plants would suck the nutrients out of the water. The third was conveyance. It was a river. We've broken all three of those. We don't have the storage. The Everglades is only half of the size it once was, and it will never be as big as it once was because there's houses and towns in the way. But you can recreate that artificially with reservoirs. So that's the science is settled on that one. The treatment, we have treatment for it, and it doesn't take any fancy power plants or anything like that. It's filter marshes, stormwater treatment areas. The water in Lake Okeechobee is over 100 parts per billion of phosphorus. And these filter marshes that are just cattails and hydrilla takes that water and sucks the phosphorus out gets it to about 15 parts per billion phosphorus. So that's the treatment component. And then it's scrubbed from there, and the conservation areas makes its way to the Everglades. The conveyance problems, as Chris was talking about, there's ditches. Ditches totally change the movement of water. When water hits a ditch, it goes with the ditch rather than sheet flow. So those are the three components. And there isn't one single project that fixes all of those. It's a lot of projects here and there and it's important that we prioritize these projects so that we get the ones done that provide the most benefit and that can be built the quickest with the most return on investment. And that's why we're now focused on the reservoir, which initially was a 60,000 acre project that in Tallahassee, the lobbyists we had 70 sugar lobbyists fighting against us when we were up there. Went from a 60,000 acre project to a 30,000. They said no to the 30,000 and ended up being a 16,000 acre project. But what we do have is a promise that the benefits of that project exist, and if the state can't meet them with the infrastructure, that they're going to have to build more reservoirs, more storage, as we told them they were going to have to years ago to hit that. So that's what our job is. It's holding them accountable.
And that's in law now.
It is in law. And the state has an absolute responsibility to manage that water quality. So if they're not meeting the water quality, they have to put more filter marshes on it. If they don't have enough storage, they're going to have to build more storage. So, yes?
Is there any way or a path to reverse the lease that you were discussing?
We're working through that right now. We work with a lot of other organizations and have some attorneys working on it. There's a couple different routes we're looking at. If we try to get that canceled, then the state would be open to litigation from the leasee or from Florida Crystals. So we're not sure if that's the best route or not at this point, but we do have some of the most brilliant legal minds working on it, and we'll have an answer on that one real soon.
Because the people's interests in that hearing were totally ignored.
Yeah, and there's a way to get out of the lease in 2 years. But the way they did the whole thing was borderline illegal. They were not operating in sunshine. They are allowed to amend the agenda if they have good cause, which is stated at the meeting. They did not state good cause at the meeting or even attempt to state good cause at the meeting. So if there's a violation there, it could potentially open the door for that to be, the whole lease to be null.
Good news is we're seeing repercussions of those actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're putting a ton of heat on the district right now to see the replacement of those board of directors that have made these decisions and continue to make poor decisions.
And the attorney that was pushing this, that was telling them you don't have a choice, you have to vote on this, he resigned on Friday. So
he resigned, and one of the board members resigned.
The vice chair.
Yeah, the vice chair. So that entity and that board of directors have been making corrupt, poor choices that affect all of us. They're responsible for spending $750 million of our money every year, and they're not acting on our behalf and in our best interest. And that's a house of cards that's coming down, and we're getting ready to give it a great big push to help it. So just stay tuned on that.
We've got some cool things coming out this week. Just pay attention. We've got some videos and content coming out on Facebook that really outlines everything what they're doing. Just pay attention. It'll be an interesting one.
What's the timing on the 16,000 acre reservoir being constructed?
Depends who you ask. Realistically, it could be built in 4 or 5 years if the agency responsible for it had an actual interest in doing so. But we've sat through these meetings that the water management district not that long ago told us they think it's going to take another 100 years to finish all these suite of projects. That some of the brightest minds in the country are saying 20 to 30. So it's physically possible for it to happen in 4 years. Under the current way of thinking, I don't think they could do it in a century.